All right, for lesson one, we're going to be looking at for chapter seven, our planet of life. So, the everyday phenomenon, the one that connects back to our case study, why is maintaining biodiversity important? So, scientists worldwide are confirming that most people have suspected for a long time many once thriving species are disappearing. This suggests the question doesn't matter. There are a number of ways to answer that, from the practical to the ethical, and to formulate your own answer. It's important to understand just how much life there actually is on planet Earth. So that kind of leads us to this term of biodiversity. And biodiversity is the variety of life across all levels of ecological organization. So when we're looking at biodiversity, okay, we can start with the most broad, which is ecosystem diversity. Now, in ecosystem diversity, we're looking at the variety of ecosystems, the variety of communities, as well as the variety of habitats that are on the landscape. So even eliminating those or paving them over or developing those has a huge impact on life. Getting more narrow, we can look at species diversity. And this is usually the one that scientists use the measure of the health of the ecosystem. But species diversity is the number or variety of species that live in a particular area. So, in other words, all of the organisms in a particular forest, not the number of organisms, but every type of organism we have. And then finally, we have in a species level, the genetic diversity. So, genetic diversity describes the difference in the DNA among individuals or of even a population of a species. So, looking at if their DNA is different, hopefully they may be able to evolve or change over time. So, let's look at each one of these a little closer. So, members of species share certain characteristics, including similar DNA, and can breed with one another to produce healthy, fertile offspring. So what species diversity is? This is the number or variety of species. So again, we're looking at this in terms of a particular region, okay, or ecosystem, or whatever you want to say. So how we create species, how more species have developed, is a process called speciation, which is the generation or the process that generates new species. So again, this is the one that is adding species to diversity. And we also have extinction, which decreases our species. So if the ecosystem changes so much, or we add new organisms that take away their niche, right? Extinction decreases from this biodiversity. So mm, how do we classify all of these organisms? So taxonomists are scientists, and those are scientists who classify species. So they use two things. They use their physical appearances. Do they look like other species? Or most of the time, they use their genetic makeup. In other words, what is their DNA and how is their DNA different or similar from other species? Now, species are then placed within a hierarchy category called taxonomic groups. And taxonomics group will reflect their evolutionary relationship. The more they have in common, the of these groups they have in common, the closer they are related. So closely related species are grouped together into genre or singular genus. Okay? Now, in traditional classification, there's five taxonomical groups of the level above genus. Okay. So, for example, the biggest one we have, the most broad, is domain. A little more narrowed down, we have kingdom, then phylum, then we have class, order, family, and then when we're talking about our scientific name, we then go into the genus and species of that particular area. So, starting at the top is most broad. Usually, domain would be eukaryote or prokaryote, all the way down to the single species that we have. The mnemonic device that I always use is Dear King Philip came over for great spaghetti. So every species is given a two-part scientific naming denoting its genus and species. So with our genus and species, our genus is always capitalized and our species is always lowercase. One thing about scientific names is both of these are written in either italicized letters or if you're just handwriting it, you underline it. So for example, we have a few names here. So Panther tigris, that is our tiger. Okay, notice the genus is the same, but all these species are different. Different. Then we have Panther onca, which would be our jaguar. Then we have Panther leo, which would be our lion. So again, they are very closely related, same genus, different species. So we can also classify species below the species level. These ones are similar enough to breed, but they've been separated for so long that they now have their own physical characteristics, and these guys are called subspecies. So a subspecies is a population of organism that has genetic-based characteristics. Now, these characteristics could be size or color, and they differ from members of the same species in a different area. Now, again, these are formed by the same processes that drive speciation, but stop short of producing an entire separate species. So here's some examples of some subspecies that we have, right? The tiger, right? So when we're looking at the tiger, we have the Siberian subspecies, the southern China tiger, the Bengal tiger, the Sumatran tiger, even some extinct variations in here. But either way, all of these species or all of these are the same species. The difference is their coloration, their size, they're slightly different due to the region that they live. So deforestation, hunting, and other pressures have caused tigers to disappear from most of the geographic range that they have historically occupied. Now, this map contrasts ranges of 8 tiger subspecies in the years 1800 to the years 2000. So you can see how they have shrunk over time. And again, coloration as well as physical appearance are different. So the next one we have is genetic diversity. Now, all species vary genetically to some degree, but what genetic diversity tries to describe is the difference in DNA. So we're looking at the difference in DNA among all of the individuals within a species and a population. And this DNA provides the raw material for adaptation. Now, populations with more genetic diversity may stand a better chance of surviving. So, the more that they survive, or the more that they have these genetic variations, the better chances that they have of surviving because if the conditions change, they can change with it. So less diversity can go extinct and be vulnerable to disease. So again, if they're all the same, the disease is going to wipe out all of them and then produce weak or defective offspring. So ecosystem diversity is talking about the number and variety of ecosystems within a given area. So the more little pockets and the more differences we have within it, the more animals can live in those particular little niches. So seashores of rocky and sandy beaches, forested cliffs, and even ocean waters would hold far more biodiversity than the same amount of area of farmland because of how different it is. So if you look at the picture at the top, you can see all of this different variety. The top up here has more ecosystems. So the more ecosystems, it can support more organisms. So the more ecosystems it has, the more types of organisms can be present. So again, the top has more species than the farmland below. So biodiversity is distributed differently throughout the world. So coming up with precise ways to express a region's biodiversity is difficult. And scientists often express biodiversity in terms of the most easily measured component, which is species diversity. This is the easiest to measure and is a pretty good representation of how healthy an ecosystem is. So species are not evenly distributed among these taxon groups either, right? Insects actually have the highest number of individuals. Insects are kings in terms of the number of organisms or different types of organisms on Earth. Now, scientists have identified and described anywhere from 1.7 to 2 million different species on planet Earth. Okay, most of those are insects. But scientists do estimate that there is anywhere between 5 and 30 million species on Earth currently. So most of these species are unidentified. And again, they are in these small uninhabited pockets that we may have not even explored yet. So there are some reasons for these estimates that vary. So some areas of Earth remain relatively unexplored. So we haven't even got to some of the places on planet Earth yet. On the bottom of the ocean, rainforests, tundras, Antarctica. So many species are tiny as well, so they make them hard to identify. So a lot of times they're easily overlooked because we're not diving deep into their morphology. As well as many organisms are extremely difficult to identify and even tell apart from a very similar species. So that leads us to patterns. Life exists in higher pockets in some regions of the Earth than others, and living things are also unevenly distributed across the planet. So there's actually a latitudinal gradient of how close or far away from the equator you are. So there is a general rule, and that general is that it increase in species. We're going to call it richness toward the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the more species you are going to find. So this has to do with habitat type, and habitats that are structurally diverse have more ecological niches or roles in the environment, and they also support greater species richness. So species diversity tends to increase with the diversity of habitats. Now, there's a lot of benefits of biodiversity. So intact ecosystems provide valuable processes known as ecosystem services. First of all, a lot of biodiversity leads to the purification of air and water. Okay. These diverse ecosystems keep all of this air and water clean, and they control, sorry. It also keeps control of pests and diseases. So if you have all the animals, our ecosystem is in balance. Therefore, all of these pests are controlled by their predators. Three is the decomposition of waste. And finally, we need these ecosystems for for food, for fuel, and fiber. So one 1997 study published in the journal Nature estimated that Earth's ecosystems provide at least $33 trillion worth of ecosystem services. So this is a wetland in Georgia, which is naturally purifies water that flows through it. This is just one of the many ecosystem services that these provide. So we can also look at biodiversity and ecosystem function. So functioning ecosystems are clearly important. But what does biodiversity have to do with it? So ecologists are finding that high levels of biodiversity tend to increase the stability of the community. As well as the ecosystem. So by having all of these species, it stabilizes and it keeps them intact. So an ecosystem is considered stable if it is both resistant and resilient. So resistant is talked about it can resist environmental change without losing function. And then resilient talks about ecosystems are affected by change, but they can bounce back and even regain functions. So, so the loss of biodiversity at any level could decrease a natural system's ability to function, as well as to provide those services that we so desperately need. Now, what about the extinction of individual species? Some of them are significantly higher than others. So, the removal of what we refer to as a keystone species results in significant change. So a keystone species is one that it kind of supports the entire ecosystem. And the removal of that one single species will cause the entire ecosystems to collapse. So keystone species are really, really important, like the sea otter in the kelp forest, or an elephant in the tundra, or a buffalo on the Great Plains. These are all things that can modify and help the ecosystem. Now, biodiversity, especially genetic diversity, benefits agriculture. So wild strains can be crossbred with their crop plant relatives. And what this leads to is the passing on of traits such as pest resistance. So again, the natural genes that allow it to survive are important to pass on, especially in agriculture. Now, every species that goes extinct represents a lost opportunity to find a cure for a disease. And many other common medicines actually come from plants or plant extracts. About one half of all of the medicine that we have created or that have been approved in the last 3 decades originated from nature, not from a lab. So again, it's so important that we keep this biodiversity alive. So in this figure here, biodiversity benefits. Nature provides us with a variety of resources, and some we have only began to use. So for the picture A, the fruit there, that's a babusa palm, produce large quantities of oil that can be used from everything from cooking to fuel. Now, medicine derived from the rosy periwinkle are used to treat two forms of life-threatening cancer. So you can see these are two plants and the extreme benefit that we have in our world. So let's think about this as a whole. What is your opinion? Now, companies search the world for organisms that can provide new drugs, food, medicine, or other valuable products. If a company discovers a compound that can be turned into a $1 billion drug, who should benefit? Do you think the company should have to share the profits with the country in which the drug originated? Or should the company get to keep all the money because it made the discovery and performed the research? So take a few minutes and answer, what do you think? Write a statement and explain your reasoning to this question. So pause the video and write your response. Now that you're done that last one, let's kind of bring this back to our investigative phenomena. Why is it important? So why is it important to measure and protect biodiversity? So I want you to write a short paragraph explaining the importance of preserving biodiversity from the point of view of one of the following: a medical researcher, a farmer, a professional chef, an ecotourist, or even an organism other than a human. So write a quick paragraph that explains why it's important to measure and protect biodiversity. So pause the video and write your paragraph now. So biodiversity, tourism, and recreation is another thing that a lot of people don't think of, but what brings in the most amount of money. So besides providing for our food and health, biodiversity can be a direct source of income. So ecotourism describes the environmental responsibility or responsible travel to protect nature areas for the purpose of appreciating nature, promoting conservation, and providing economic benefits to the local people. So ecotourism is important in two folds. First of all, it provides money for the local economy. And second of all, it provides an incentive to protecting all of these different species. So ecotourism emphasizes conservation, education, sustainability, and community participation. So ecotourism is something that's really important. And again, ecotourism can bring millions of dollars into a nation's economy. Here, a tourist is photographing a cheetah. And again, the cheetah is so important because one, it's a different species, but two, protecting it provides the money that we need for our particular economy. All right, so this completes here lesson number 1. What you need to do if you are taking Mr. O'Brien's classes, make sure you are answering the end of the lesson questions, the reading checks, the assessments, but hopefully this kind of helps you out with the process of biodiversity.